I was 12 when my uncle disappeared. That's how everyone put it at first, disappeared, like he'd walked into fog and never walked back out. My father called it that. My grandmother cried the word into her hands. Even the school counselor who pulled me aside used it gently, as if the right verb could make the absence hurt less. But the truth was simpler and harder. Uncle Sam had been on a fishing vessel off the Aleutian coast. A storm came in fast. The boat went down. 4 men made it into a raft. He wasn't one of them. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days. They found Debra's oil slicks and cold water. They found everything except him. At the funeral, if you could call it that, there was no casket. Just photographs on a table and people who didn't know what to do with their hands. My father stood near the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. My mother kept her hand on my shoulder the entire time. I remember the church smelled like old carpet and lilies, and I didn't cry because I didn't understand yet that some people leave and never come back. The paperwork came later. Death certificate, maritime insurance. A payout to my grandmother because she'd been listed as beneficiary. My father didn't talk about it much, but I knew it bothered him. He'd mention Sam sometimes when he thought I wasn't listening. How they'd grown up sharing a room, how Sam taught him to gut a fish, how he'd left for Alaska because the money was good and he wanted to buy a house someday. I learned not to ask too many questions. Years went by. I finished school, went to college, came back to the same small Oregon town where nothing much had changed. I worked at a credit union processing loans, got engaged, called my parents on Sundays. My father had retired from the mill. My mother gardened and volunteered at the library. Life was steady, predictable, quiet. Then, on a Thursday in October, I got a call from a law office I'd never heard of. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Claire Howell, paralegal with a firm in Seattle. She asked if I was related to Samuel Roy Tennant, and my stomach did something strange because no one had said his full name in years. He was my uncle, I said. I'm calling regarding an estate matter, she said, her tone perfectly neutral. Could you come to our office next week? We have some documents that require your signature. My uncle died 30 years ago. Yes, she said, we're aware. She wouldn't say more over the phone. I told my fiancée that night. She thought it was probably some old pension thing, maybe a clerical error that needed clearing up. I wanted to believe that. But something about the paralegal's voice. Calm, careful, like she was holding a door open and waiting to see if I'd walk through. Stayed with me. I didn't tell my father. I don't know why. Maybe because he'd spent 3 decades not talking about Sam. Maybe because I had this feeling, faint and cold, that whatever this was, it was going to hurt. The law office was downtown Seattle, 16th floor, to ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. Claire Howell met me in the lobby. She was older than I'd imagined, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain. She walked me into a small conference room and set a folder on the table between us. This is going to feel unusual, she said, sitting down. But I want you to hear it all before you respond. I nodded. She opened the folder and pulled out a photocopy of a handwritten will. The signature at the bottom was messy but legible: Samuel R. Tennant. Dated 2 weeks before the boat went down. Your uncle left this with a friend in Kodiak, Claire said. The friend passed away 6 months ago. Her daughter found it while clearing the house and contacted us. I stared at the document. He left everything to you, she said. I was 12. Yes. You were his only nephew. He didn't have children. According to the will, if anything happened to him, his life insurance payout and any remaining assets were to be held in trust until you turned 25. After that, they would transfer to you directly. I felt lightheaded. I never received anything. No, Claire said. You didn't. She slid another document across the table. This one was a death certificate, but the details were different from what I remembered. Beneficiary, Helen Tennant, my grandmother. This was filed with the insurance company in 1994, Claire said. Your grandmother received a payout of $85,000. She was his mother? Yes. But according to the will your uncle left in Alaska, she was not supposed to be the beneficiary. You were. The room felt too bright. Did she know? Claire's expression didn't change. We don't know what she knew. But the will was never probated. It was never submitted to the court. The insurance company processed the claim based on the beneficiary listed in their records, Helen Tennant, and the death certificate your family provided. My family provided. Your father signed as next of kin. I sat back in my chair. My hands were cold. What does that mean? It means either your uncle never updated his insurance paperwork to reflect the will he wrote in Alaska, or someone chose not to honor it, given that the will was left with a friend and not filed through official channels. It's possible your father didn't know it existed, but he would have known Sam wanted to take care of me. Claire didn't answer that. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. Legally, you may have a claim to the original payout plus interest, if you can demonstrate that the will supersedes the beneficiary designation. But it's been 30 years. Your grandmother passed away 10 years ago. Your father is still living. Pursuing this could open a case that involves family testimony, financial records, and potentially uncomfortable questions. You're saying I'd have to accuse my father of something. I'm saying you'd have to ask questions he may not want to answer. I sat there for a long time, looking at the will. My uncle's handwriting was cramped, hurried. He'd written it on lined paper, probably at a kitchen table in some rented room that smelled like fish and diesel. He'd written my name 3 times. Can I take a copy of this? I asked. Claire slid a folder across the table. Everything's in here. Take your time. Call me if you have questions. I drove home in silence. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I just watched the highway and thought about my father standing at the back of that church 30 years ago, arms crossed, saying nothing. I didn't tell him about the meeting. I told my fiancée I needed a few days to think. She asked if I was okay, and I said yes, which wasn't entirely true but also wasn't a lie. I just didn't have words for what I was feeling yet. I started looking through old boxes in my apartment, things I'd kept from my parents' house over the years. High school yearbooks, photo albums, a shoebox of letters my grandmother had written me in college. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Proof, maybe, or something that would make it make sense. What I found was a savings account passbook from 1995. It was tucked inside a Christmas card my grandmother had sent me the year she died. I'd kept the card because she'd written a long note inside about how proud she was of me. I'd never noticed the passbook behind it. The account had been opened in my name when I was 13. Initial deposit $85,000. Subsequent withdrawals $40,000, $12,000, $15,000. Transfers out to accounts I didn't recognize. The balance at closing 3 years later was $600. I sat on my bedroom floor holding that passbook for an hour. Then I called the credit union where I worked and asked to speak to someone in fraud and compliance. I told them I'd found an old account in my name that I hadn't opened. They told me I'd need to file a formal inquiry, provide identification, and request records. It would take time. I filed the paperwork that afternoon. I still didn't call my father. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the compliance officer. She asked me to come in. When I sat down in her office, she had a file open on her desk and an expression I recognized. Neutral, careful. Like she didn't want to be the one telling me what came next. The account was opened by your grandmother in 1995, she said. You were listed as the account holder, but she retained full signing authority as custodian until you turned 18. I never signed anything. You didn't need to. You were a minor. The deposits came from a life insurance payout processed through a policy held by. She checked her notes. Pacific Maritime Insurance. Beneficiary Helen Tennant. What were the withdrawals for? She hesitated. The records don't specify, but they were made by check, signed by your grandmother, and co-signed in some cases by your father. I felt something crack open inside my chest. My father knew about this account. Yes, and he let her drain it. The compliance officer closed the file gently. I can't speak to intent, but yes, the records show your father co-signed several large withdrawals between 1996 and 1998. I thanked her and left. I didn't go home. I drove to my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to decide if I was going to go inside. I went inside. My mother was in the kitchen making soup. My father was in the living room watching a baseball game. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. Old furniture, family photos on the mantel, the smell of something warm on the stove. I stood in the doorway and said, "I need to talk to you about Uncle Sam." My father didn't look away from the TV. "Not much to talk about," he said. "I met with a lawyer in Seattle." That got his attention. He muted the game and turned toward me. "What lawyer?" "One who had a will. Sam's will. He left everything to me." My father's face didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. "That was a long time ago," he said. "You knew?" "I knew he'd talked about setting something aside for you. But there wasn't anything official. No paperwork. Just talk." "There was paperwork. He left a will in Alaska. Nobody told me that. You filed the death certificate. You co-signed withdrawals from the account my grandmother opened in my name. $85,000, Dad." My mother appeared in the doorway behind me. "What's going on?" I didn't turn around. "Did you know about the account?" I asked my father. He stood up slowly. "Your grandmother needed help. The house was falling apart. She had medical bills. I co-signed a few checks so she could keep the lights on. You spent my inheritance." "It wasn't your inheritance," he said, his voice harder now. "It was insurance money that went to your grandmother, because she was listed as the beneficiary. Sam didn't leave a legal will. He left some scribbled note with a woman in Alaska who didn't even contact anyone for 30 years. That's not a will. That's a letter. It was notarized. I don't care." We stood there looking at each other. My mother was saying something behind me, but I couldn't hear her. "You knew what he wanted," I said. "And you took it anyway." "I took care of my mother," he said. "And I took care of you. You went to college. You have a good job. You're fine. That wasn't your decision to make. You were 12 years old. You think you could have managed $85,000. No. But I could have managed it at 18. Or 25. Or any point where I actually got to choose." My father sat back down. "You need to let this go." I didn't say anything. I left. For a week, I didn't answer their calls. My mother left voicemails asking me to please talk to her, saying my father hadn't meant it the way it sounded. My father didn't leave any messages. I called Claire Howell. "I want to pursue the claim," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yes. This will require depositions. Your father will need to testify. So will anyone else involved in the management of that account. It will take time, and it will be adversarial." "I understand." "Okay," she said. "I'll start the process." The legal proceedings moved slowly. There were motions, document requests, affidavits. My father hired a lawyer who argued that the will had never been properly probated, that the insurance company had acted in good faith, based on the information available, and that the statute of limitations had long since expired. Our side argued that the will was valid, that I'd been defrauded as a minor, and that the clock didn't start until I became aware of the fraud, which was 6 weeks ago. It went to mediation first. I sat in a conference room across from my father and his lawyer. My mother wasn't there. Claire sat beside me, a legal pad in front of her, her pen resting on the table. The mediator was a retired judge, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a voice that made everything sound reasonable. He laid out the facts, the competing claims, the possible outcomes. Then he asked my father, "Did you know your brother intended the insurance money to go to his nephew?" My father looked at the table. "He mentioned it once." "Did you communicate that to the insurance company or to the probate court?" "No." "Why not?" "Because my mother needed help. And I didn't think a kid needed that kind of money sitting around." "So you made that choice for him?" "I made a choice for my family." The mediator nodded slowly. "And do you believe that was fair to your son?" My father didn't answer. The mediation didn't settle anything. We went to court. The hearing took place in a small courtroom in King County. There was no jury, just a judge who looked tired and had a stack of files on her desk that suggested this was one of many complicated family disputes she'd heard that month. Claire presented the will, the account records, and testimony from the compliance officer at the credit union. My father's lawyer argued procedural defenses, questioned the validity of the will, and pointed out that I'd benefited from my father's financial support throughout my childhood and education. The judge asked me directly, "Did you know about this account when you were a minor?" "No, Your Honor." "When did you first learn about it?" 6 weeks ago." She looked at my father. "Did you inform your son about the account when he turned 18? "No." "Why not?" "I didn't think it mattered anymore." "The money was gone?" The judge made a note and then looked back at me. "What are you seeking in this case?" "The original payout, adjusted for inflation, minus any legitimate expenses that can be documented as being for my benefit. You understand that enforcing this could create significant financial hardship for your father?" "Yes, Your Honor." She nodded and said she'd issue a ruling within 30 days. I didn't speak to my father after the hearing. We walked out of the courtroom in opposite directions. 3 weeks later, the ruling came. The judge found that the will was valid, that it should have been probated, and that the failure to do so constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. She ordered my father to repay the amount that had been withdrawn from the account, adjusted for inflation, minus documented expenses directly related to my upbringing. The total came to $93,000. My father didn't have that kind of money. His lawyer filed an appeal, but it was dismissed. The judgment stood. A payment plan was arranged. My father would pay me back in installments over 10 years. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. My mother called me 2 months after the judgment. She asked if I'd come to the house. I almost said no. But something in her voice made me say yes. When I got there, my father wasn't home. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with tea she wasn't drinking. She looked older than I remembered. "Your father is ashamed," she said. I didn't respond. "He won't say it. But I know he is. He thought he was protecting the family. He thought you'd be fine. He was wrong." "Yes," she said quietly. "He was." She looked at me, and her eyes were wet. "I didn't know about the will. I knew about the account, but I thought it was for you. I thought your grandmother was setting something aside. I didn't know she was spending it until it was too late. You could have told me." "I know. And I'm sorry." We sat there for a long time. Eventually, she asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, which was mostly true. I'd moved forward with my life. The money, when it started coming, went into savings. I didn't spend it. I just wanted it to exist. Proof that my uncle had thought about me, that someone had cared. My father and I didn't reconcile. We didn't have a conversation where he apologized or I forgave him. We just existed in separate spaces. My mother visited me sometimes. I sent her flowers on her birthday, but my father stayed distant and I let him. Years passed. I got married, bought a house, had a daughter. My wife knew the whole story, and she never pressed me to fix things with my father. She just held space for whatever I was feeling, and that was enough. When my daughter was 3, my mother called and said my father was sick, cancer, stage 4. He had maybe 6 months. I didn't visit right away. I thought about it. I talked to my wife about it. She said it was my choice, and she'd support whatever I decided. I waited 2 months. Then I went. He was in a hospice facility by then, thin and pale and quiet. My mother was there when I arrived. She stood up and hugged me, and then she left the room to give us space. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "Didn't think you'd come." I wasn't sure I would. He nodded slightly, his hands resting on the blanket. "Your mother said you have a little girl." "Yeah. Her name's Clara." "That's nice." We sat in silence. Then he said, "I was wrong." I didn't say anything. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I wasn't. I took something that wasn't mine to take, and I hurt you. And I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something. "Okay," I said. He closed his eyes, and I thought he'd fallen asleep. But after a moment, he said, "Sam would have been proud of you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sat there until my mother came back, and then I left. He died 3 weeks later. I went to the funeral. I stood in the back, the way he'd stood at Sam's service 30 years before. I didn't cry. I just watched people talk about the man they'd known. The father, the husband, the neighbor. And I thought about the version of him I'd known, the one who'd made a choice that shaped my life in ways I was still untangling. After it was over, my mother hugged me and said she was glad I'd come. I told her I was too. The payments kept coming for another year, transferred automatically from an account my mother managed. Then they stopped. She called and explained that the estate was settled, that there wasn't anything left. I told her it was fine. I meant it. I'd gotten what I needed, not the money, but the acknowledgement, the truth. The proof that my uncle had thought of me, that someone had wanted to give me a future. And that even though it had been taken, I'd found a way to reclaim it. I think about Sam sometimes. I wonder what he would have been like if the boat hadn't gone down. If he'd bought that house he wanted, if he'd come home for holidays, if he'd met my daughter. I wonder if he knew in those last moments on the water that the will he'd left behind would matter someday. I hope he did, because it mattered to me. I don't talk about the case much. It's not a story I tell at parties or bring up with coworkers. It's just something that happened. Something that changed the way I see family and trust and the choices people make when they think no one's watching. But sometimes, when my daughter asks about her middle name, Clara Samantha, I tell her it's after someone who cared about her dad a long time ago. Someone who got lost at sea but left something behind anyway. And that feels like enough. If you've ever discovered that the people you trusted most made choices you never got to question, you're not alone. Sometimes the truth comes late, but it still comes. And when it does, you get to decide what to do with it, not for them. For you.